The first thing, our mission is called 10:15, and that's not random. That comes from Scripture, actually, Romans 10, verse 15. It's one of the missionaries around the world. We love this section of verses, actually. I should say section because it kind of starts at 13, where Paul is writing to the church at Rome. He says, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they going to hear without someone preaching? And how are they going to preach unless they are sent?" So this is 15. "As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news." So Bobbi, Joe, and I, we like to think, and our kids, they've been dragged along in this effort. We like to think that if there's one thing that we have going for us, it's beautiful feet, right? So that's what you should take. No, that's not what you should take from that verse. But that section of verse is about people that are lost, completely lost. They're going to remain lost if people aren't sent, and if those people who are sent don't preach and do what those John and Chris in the video did, right? Just relax on the beach in Aruba. Now, if you looked at Thailand, you might think, well, Matt and Bobbi Joe, they're doing something similar. There are parts of Thailand, oh my goodness, it is a beautiful country. If you ever think, hey, we're going to go on a honeymoon, or we're going to tell our kids to go on our honeymoon to Hawaii, don't do it. Send them to Thailand for sure. You'll save money. We have some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. Saying that, we don't live there, right? We live in a place called Bangkok that has 10, 12 million other people. It's a concrete jungle. It is nothing like what you'll see if you Google Thailand. You'll see the best. We don't live there. We get there every once in a while, and we don't post pictures of that on Facebook. Right, so, and the whole reason we got into this is, at one point, I'm not going to share the whole testimony. Time is limiting, but I was outside of Christ. I was completely lost. I was raised in a Catholic home, and then 16 years old, asked my single mother, can I have permission not to do this anymore, because my older brother, he stepped out. And so, long story short, I didn't come to Christ. I didn't have somebody, a friend, share the gospel with me until I was 21 years old. And when I was 21 years old, and I came to believe, and he challenged me to do two things: to read the Gospel of John, which I went home and did, and to read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, which I did. And I guarantee if you do those two things, or tell a friend to do those two things, and they actually follow through, good things tend to follow. And so after that, I went off to Bible college, went off to seminary, and then became a preacher, and I preached in rural Indiana, a couple different towns in rural Indiana. I'm originally from Cincinnati. Met my wife at Bible college in Cincinnati, Bobbi Joe, Shirley's granddaughter. And so I know what it is to be on that other side of what Paul's talking about, to be outside of Christ, and to have somebody who was sent and who preached, and I heard and believed. And so it makes sense that we are now missionaries because of just my own story. So we are missionaries where? In Thailand, 1040 windows. Again, the picture looks so much better back there. But that boxed-in rectangle, okay, that is the 1040 window. This is something that people have talked about for the last, since the 70s, I think. It's just a window. I'll explain what happens in that window. 2/3 of the world's population live in that window. That's because China and India, right, are in that window. And yet 90% of those people have not heard the gospel. The most dominant religions in that window: Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Thailand, where we are, is the most Buddhist country on the planet today. So percentage-wise, we have more Buddhists than any other country. And here's an alarming statistic: only 5 cents of every $100 spent towards missions is allocated to the 1040 window. Right? So you got 2/3 of the world's population, 90% of them are lost, and 5 cents out of every $100. It's crazy and alarming statistic, but of course we're supported by churches. All the churches that support us, we can look at and say, hey, you're not a part of that. What's going on? But it's alarming stuff. Thailand. Again, this is going to be really hard in black and white, so peer at that picture behind you for just a second. There's red and there's green, all right? The red represents there's no church. Anywhere where you see red, there's not one church. And I'm not talking about a Wesleyan church or a Baptist church or a Methodist. I'm saying no church whatsoever. The green areas, you have at least one church in those areas. So Bangkok is, just walk up. So Bangkok is about right there in the center there on the Gulf. And that's where we are. And there's a lot of red, even in a city that has 10 million people. So if you thought about this in terms of what's it like, I don't believe I have this picture, no I don't. But if you thought about that and you put a map of the United States up there, I think it would all be green, right? Like there's if you separated the United States by counties or something like that, I think it would all be green. And so that's why our mission out there, we've kind of made it our mission statement, just making the gospel accessible in Southeast Asia, particularly in Thailand, because here the gospel is very accessible. We have a lot of people that reject Christ. We have a lot of people that choose not to follow him. But for the most part, if you want to hear about him in this country, it's pretty easy to run into a Christian, to have some encounter, to go to any one of a number of churches, even in Hamilton here. I'm sure there's probably a dozen churches or. Okay, 4. All right. So still, there's good opportunity in Thailand. There's just not a lot of opportunity to know him. And here's a person, Sudarat, behind us. She is just indicative of that. She's representative of the fact that most people don't encounter many Christians. So outside of our family, she only knows one other Christian. She's a security guard that we met 10 years ago, the first time that Bobbi, Joe, and I went to Thailand. We met her, struck up a friendship. And yeah, if she didn't know us, she would only know one other Christian. This is the reality for a lot of people, a lot of Thai people. So our mission, what we do, is we focus primarily on discipleship. So we're not, a lot of people have this idea of missionaries that just go to places like Kosovo and Thailand and different parts of the world and just kind of like stand on street corners and learn the language and then preach in those people's language and hope to make disciples that way. That's not our agenda. What we do, I'm used to equipping the saints like Dave, like just pouring into you guys, pouring into existing believers, right? And then equipping them, because I believe that Thai people can reach other Thai people better than a Westerner from Ohio, right? So that's what we're in the business of doing. We do learn the language, and we do try to reach people that are outside of Christ if the opportunity presents, but our primary thing is equipping the saved so that they can go out and reach more people. So 3 ways that we do this. Maybe I need, there we go, technology. So we're doing it in partnership with the local church in everyday life, and then in partnership with a ministry called Construction of Hope. All right, my wife is on it now. Next slide. All right, so first in partnership with the local church. Next slide. And this church that we serve is called Tairomprakhun. That's a Thai word. It means, literally, Rome is umbrella. So literally this means umbrella of grace. So under the grace of God, Bangkok Church. And it's Bangkok because we actually have 7 daughter churches that are scattered throughout Thailand. This is the sort of the main one. So this guy next to me, I'm wearing my same outfit. This guy next to me, his name is Ruth, and Ruth is my translator. He actually went to Cornell and got a law degree, and he said that's not enough, so he went to Georgetown and got another law degree. So he is a lawyer in Thailand, but very fluent, obviously, in English. And so I can speak, read, write at maybe an intermediate level, but preaching in Thai, teaching the Bible in Thai, very difficult. So I still enlist the services of my good friend Ruth. So the main way that I serve that church there we go, is I teach and I preach. And so this is just a sampling of some of the things that I preached through in the course of the last year. Ezra, Nehemiah, 1 Peter, James, sermon series on prayer, a sermon series through the Gospel of John, Christmas series, taught on things like Ephesians, baptism, and beware of the wolves is something I want to kind of touch on, because here's one of the dilemmas that you have in Thailand. When you're in America, you can sort of go and get good resources at a number of different places. We don't have as many bookstores as we used to, like Christian bookstores, kind of closing down because of Amazon, right?
Yeah.
But we can order from Amazon any number of good resources. You can ask your minister, hey, can you recommend some books that I should read, some YouTube preaching or teaching that might be useful and edifying. Man, you can't do a lot of that in Thailand. And what we have in Thailand and in our very city is we've got a lot of churches that are preaching a prosperity gospel. So if you know what I mean by that, it's the gospel that primarily focuses on physical things, where I believe the true gospel is one of, Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world, right? He's like trying to get us to focus on spiritual things. So this is one thing that drives us nuts and especially hurts our church out there. We've lost, in the time, the 3 years that we've been there, we've lost several members to prosperity churches, because they'll run into their friends, and their friends will be like, hey, my church promises that you'll get rich. My church promises that you'll get healthy, that if you get a disease, it'll go away every time. And so we've lost many people, and so that's one thing that they asked me to teach on. In the absence of resources, in the absence of even the guy that founded this church 25 years ago, he's a lawyer. He doesn't have as much time to devote to the church. And so one of my key roles there is just serving this church, being somebody that can teach and preach. I'm not, the most capable guy in the world, but again, they've got 2 Bible colleges in all of Thailand as well. So there's just not a whole lot of people that can teach and preach the word. So this is the main way that I kind of contribute. I just work for the church. All right, next way that we're making disciples is just in everyday life. And this is not the work of a missionary. This is the work of every Christian, right? Just being Christ to the world. So specifically, this is I'll just tell you about a couple of people that we've just encountered in everyday life. This is our friend Choke, and his name means luck, right? So Choke, he's got just a crazy story. Previously, he had a wife, and she was murdered, and I believe it was her own brother who wanted the inheritance and that sort of thing, and so he went off and he became a monk. And that's what a lot of people do in Thailand, not necessarily because they're strong Buddhists. They just want to find a place to hide out. They want to find a place to get away from life for a while. And so he became a monk for a time, and then he came out of that, and he started he became a driver. So he's a taxi driver. He drove around a woman in Texas. And I believe that's where he encountered the gospel for the first time. Later on, when I met Choke, so that was about 10 years ago, but I met Choke about 3 years ago, Bobbi Joe and I. Long story short, he had a Bible on his dashboard. And you don't find that a lot when you're driving around in taxis in Thailand. And so I inquired. The guy spoke English. I was like, wow, this is fascinating. And so we got to talking, and he told me that he was sort of kind of maybe a Christian, but he hadn't really been inside a church building worshiping with other people in years. And so ultimately I was able to baptize Choke. I don't have a video of that, I believe, but that's a picture of, is it video? It might be a video. No? She's like, I don't know. All right. Oh well. Next slide. And some other people that we just encountered in everyday life. These are our neighbors. Wise is the man. Team is his wife. They all take nicknames, and none of them really make sense because he's not the wisest guy in the world. And Nainan is their son. So he's actually born in a Christian home. His mother was a Christian, which is kind of rare, right, to grow up in that home. But Teen, for the past 15 years, she was always a Buddhist. And her father, to this day, is a monk, right? And he's been a monk for a very, very long time. But what happened with these guys is a couple of Christmases ago, we had our church come out and sing Christmas carols. And that means we had about 30 people gather in our living room, which is about half the size or a third of the size of this stage. And so they're all seated Indian style. We served them hot chocolate. It was 95 degrees out, right? And what you do is when somebody comes into your home in Thailand, it's a rare thing to have people come into your home. But when you do that, you encourage one another. And so these guys encouraged us, we encouraged them. Teen, who had gone to church with her husband, but always thought all the Christians she encountered were sort of hypocritical. She saw this activity of encouragement, this mutual encouraging, and it's actually that night that kind of prompted her to start following Christ. And so now, Teen is a Christian after 15 years. It was this one night that we didn't really have anything to do with. Nobody planned anything. It just sort of happened. She saw the way that we love one another. And that's what Jesus said. He said, you'll know my disciples by the way they do that. All right, next slide. So the other way that we make disciples, lastly, in partnership with this ministry called Construction of Hope. Next slide. So Construction of Hope is a ministry that exists both in Cambodia, which neighbors Thailand, and Thailand, where we are. You can see the two pinpoints there. So Phnom Penh, Cambodia, they have an orphanage. And then in Bangkok, we have a ministry. Next slide. Okay, so again, the picture in the back is better, but these are the kids that we get to work with. Most of these kids are Cambodian. And what happened is their parents are construction workers. That's why the ministry is called Construction of Hope. So their parents have come from Cambodia because there's no work there. It's a very poor country. They've come to Thailand, many illegally, right, on the backs of these Thai people when they work for $7 a day, 10 hours a day, right, and about 6 days a week on average. And so we work with their kids because their kids are denied education in Thailand. Thai schools legally are supposed to allow them to come, but each school has the right to say no, and most schools do. For two reasons: Thais and Cambodians, it's like Samaritans and Jews, they just don't love each other. But secondly, these kids are coming and going, and they don't want to budget for kids that might not be here in a month or in 6 months from now. So these kids, they're left alone at their at what is basically a slum. Go to the next, we don't have it yet. One of the leaders, by the way, is this man right here, Vino. And Vino, he kind of co-founded this ministry. He's a Thai pastor, a former Buddhist himself, and he has this heart for Cambodian people, which most Thai Christians don't happen to have. Next slide. This is Bobbi Jo, and so what she does, I should mention that my primary ministry is what we do with the church. Her primary ministry is what we're doing out here. So 2 to 3 days a week, Bobbi Jo teaches English to these kids. And just the growth that is visible to us is amazing, like the improvement. And of course, we love on them, we disciple them, we sing worship songs with them, teach them what the songs mean, and that sort of thing. Another thing that we've been able to do is just advocate, market, and fundraise for Construction of Hope. Picture behind me, we had a charity game where Bobbi Jo and I came up with this idea just over a Thai meal one day with the founder, where we just said, hey, Tuesdays and Fridays, the kids go and they play soccer. They have to rent the field, they need cleats, they need all sorts of money to pay for this. But it gives them exercise and they need it. So we came up with this idea. And so just once a year, the school where our children attend has a charity tournament now where we played the kids from Construction of Hope. My daughter, by the way, she got MVP of the underwear. I have to throw that out. And we raise enough money through this once a year event to supply their need for the whole year. So it's pretty cool what we've been able to do there. Here's where they live. So this is a real picture. This is the kids on their bikes. This isn't off of Google Images. This is the camp that they live at. So it's pretty much a modern day slum. Okay, you can go to the next one. So I just want to tell you and finish just with one story quickly about this kid named Chris, because this is where Construction of Hope started. They were doing a project at the school. His parents were working on an addition to our kids' international school, right? So Chris, he came up to one of the teachers. He's like, "Can you teach me English? Like, I really want to learn English." And so for 6 months, he said yes. And for 6 months, Vino, who I showed you, and another teacher from the school, they connected. And every Saturday, Chris would just go out and learn English. And then, little by little, other kids would trickle in with him. Next slide. So there's a picture of Chris when he's much younger, learning English. Next slide. There's a picture of Chris being baptized. And yeah, by the way, I know, all sorts of ways to baptize, but in Thailand it's very interesting. When you immerse and do baptism that way, you are going to just take them like frontwards. You're not going to go back. You just put your hand on their head and you dunk. And it's really weird because sometimes people fight it. And you're like, "What do you know? Just go down." All right, so next slide. So there he is coming up out of the water. Next slide. There he is sharing tracts, right? Like little comic strips about Jesus, the gospel, and tracts. The amazing thing in Thailand, they still work. Like you can actually just hand somebody a tract, and they very well might show up at your church on Sunday and come to believe. In fact, one of the guys that serves at Construction of Hope, that's exactly how he came to know Christ, through a comic strip. So it's incredible. So that's him. And that's him leading worship on Sunday mornings out of the ministry. So one thing that you can do at Construction of Hope, these kids, they will learn not only English, they'll learn how to play guitar and play piano and how to bake and how to cook and how to plant and do agriculture and things like that. So just teaching them a variety of things. That's his grandmother, who Chris led to Christ, right? And that's one thing that can happen. Next slide. And there's Chris. This is a pretty recent picture. You can see that Chris is 16 years old now, where in that first picture he would have been maybe 12 or 13. So Chris, just end with this beautiful story. Here's what Chris does to, like a lot of times as a missionary, you think we're going to go and pour into these people and build these people up. Sometimes the opposite happens, and Chris is one of those kids that makes those things happen. So one day Bobbi Jo is teaching, and she says, here's our lesson. I want you to draw a picture and write about what you want to be when you grow up. Now the reality is, for a lot of those kids, they're going to be construction workers, and there's nothing else that they're going to be. They don't have the opportunity that everybody in this room has. Chris, he writes, I want to be a missionary. I'm like, okay, he probably means he just wants to come save some Americans, right? I don't know what he means by that. And he proceeds to tell me, and I ask him, what do you mean? And he says, I want to make $7 a day for the rest of my life. I want to stay living in those slums that don't have any running water. I want to keep taking baths in a basin where all my relatives and all my friends take a bath every day. No electricity running in that place. I want to stay living in these conditions. I want to work under the same conditions that my parents labor in, not making any money, not ever getting ahead physically, because most of those Cambodian people don't know the gospel. And I want to serve them, and I want to share the gospel with these people that otherwise wouldn't know it. Doesn't that just move you? I mean, it's the most moving thing. When Jesus and Paul and pretty much everybody else throughout the New Testament talks about being heavenly minded, this kid is one of the more heavenly minded. All of these kids, the most heavenly minded kids that we ever met. So it's actually been a blessing for us to go across the world and encounter people with this kind of faith and this kind of sacrifice, really. So what can I do? What can you guys do as a church? The number one thing that any church can do for us, you thought I was going to talk about money there, is pray. Prayer is what got us on the field. Prayer is what sustains us on the field. I'll give you specifically why missionaries need prayer. One thing, that's my grandma picture behind you. It was about 3 months ago before we returned that she passed. And man, it's hard. I'm sure that everybody in this room has lost somebody. But to lose somebody while you're on the other side of the world, it is hard. Because my cousins are writing to me, Facebook, instant messaging, and they're saying, hey, are you grieving? I'm like, no, I can't. I can't because I'm not there. I'm not with you. And so pray for all your missionaries just because we're dealing with the same life stuff that you're dealing with, but sometimes it's really hard when you're that far away. Next slide. Pray for our dog, because look at the poor thing, he just wants to get away from her daughter. I'm just kidding. Our daughter got sick. She missed 14 consecutive days of school. Pray for us and your other missionaries, because often we don't have the same kind of doctors. We don't have the same kind of hospital care that you have. It took over a month to diagnose the problem. We actually had to go to a British doctor who is serving in Thailand to figure out what was wrong. Next slide. Pray for us because Thailand, specifically in February and March of this year, there was no place on earth that had dirtier air. So there's apps and such that you can check the air quality. Good air is 0 to 50. The average air in Thailand is 100 to 200. If you have asthma, you shouldn't even go outside if it's 100 to 150. Our kids might actually, probably will, the longer that we're over there, develop asthma when they otherwise would not have it because of the conditions. And we actually had to wear masks for 2 months out of the year. So just pray for us and again your other missionaries that are doing different things, because America really is a good place. I mean, even from just air. There's not a whole lot of places here where you breathe air like that. And you can give, so I have both things. Life Song for Orphans, you can actually sponsor kids that we work with. It's $35 for a half sponsorship, it's $70 for a full sponsorship. We're getting ready to do a half sponsorship ourselves. It's pretty cool to sponsor a kid that you actually go and get to see during the week. And here's some links, so 1015go.org, that's a link to our page. The best thing you could do, if you're interested, is to go to our Facebook, and you can talk to Shirley. She's a member of this group too. But the Millers in Thailand, just put that into the Facebook search bar. Ask to join, request to join, and we'll accept you. You can do it today. I'll accept you on the way home. All right. So, and then lifesong.org. That's where the kids can be sponsored. Last slide, and this is it. You can go. All right. A lot of times, if your missionaries are in Dominican, they're South America, they're somewhere much closer, they tend to get a lot more visitors than people in Bangkok. And so I invite you to, if you're here today and you're like, man, I've got, maybe you're somebody that would like to come see us and see what we do in person. Maybe you've got some grandkids, they don't really know what they're doing with their lives. Maybe you want to send them out for a couple of weeks and get acquainted with what real poverty looks like and how we're combating it and what it looks like for unreached people to be reached. We invite you to do that. All right, so I thank you guys for your time. Let me just maybe pray us out. Questions?
Let me just
Okay.
say a couple things. I encourage you to obviously pray. Obviously pray. You said it very eloquently. Really consider giving. We're going to be, as a church, we're going to be giving an honorarium this morning. But as individuals, I mean, going forward, I imagine we may talk about this, board members, we may talk about maybe partnering. We're already budgeted for this year. We already, we've got the line item set, but there's future. And so, board members, let's talk about this, right? Let's talk about whether this would be a ministry we we would want to partner with, and let's seek the Lord's leading on that. But individually, think about what the Lord might want you to do to help out. It may not be everybody, it probably won't be everybody, but the Lord may move somebody. And that whole thing of go, I am firmly convinced that every Christian needs to get out of their comfort zone and go cross culture. Now you may do it in the U.S. You definitely will do it if you go around the world. But every Christian needs to get out of their comfort zone at least once in their life for a significant period of time. Because we do not understand. The thing that really struck me, 5 cents. 2/3 of the world's population, and 5 cents out of every $100 given to missions is designated for 2/3 of the world's population, the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Muslims. 5 cents? We can do better than that, can't we? We can do better than that. And I think God would call us to. So pray very seriously about that. Pray about that. This has been excellent. I appreciate the challenge. And now you can pray to close us out.
All right, let's pray. Father, we're all so thankful to be in a country, to be in a place where you have been so accessible, where your gospel could be presented, could be heard, could be received, could be believed in, and all of us in this room have come to do that, to love you, to serve you, to want to honor you in everything that we do. But Father, my prayer is also that we would recognize wherever we are that we are surrounded by people that were like me, people that are like the people in Thailand that have not heard the gospel and are not going to hear it unless we proclaim it. So Father, help us to be intentional, every one of us in everyday life, in our relationships. Help us to realize that time is of the essence. Help us to have a sense of urgency about spreading the gospel, the good news of your Son, Jesus Christ. And help us to be like him and attract people to you just through our works, that people will see him in us and glorify you. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.